She planned to crush him, thinking him a weakling, until his blade forged out the war between the humans and the alien invaders had been raging for years, and it had reached a point where no one believed the humans stood a chance anymore. Their enemy, the Cressari, had superior technology, advanced weaponry, and vast armies. Humans were weak, primitive, and inferior in the eyes of the Cressari. Every time they thought they might stand a chance, they were crushed, their hopes dashed once again. Private Roland Jet was one such human soldier. He had been part of the resistance for years, but he had failed time and time again. The missions were always too difficult, and he never quite measured up to the standards set by the Cressari. He wasn't the best shot, he wasn't strong, and he was always outclassed by the more experienced soldiers. He was often mocked, and no one truly believed he had what it took to survive the war, let alone make a difference. General Kelera, a Cressari commander known for her ruthlessness, had personally marked Roland as one of the weaklings. She watched as humans tried to rise against her, only to fall in defeat. To her, they were nothing more than a nuisance, an inferior species trying to stand up to the might of the Cressari. She considered them expendable, their lives unimportant. Kelera had one goal, to completely eradicate the human race from the galaxy. She knew that it would take time, but the more humans they wiped out, the less resistance they would face. She had a plan to break the humans completely, to destroy their spirit so that no one would dare rise up against them ever again. It was then that she heard of Roland Jet. He was a nobody, just one more soldier who couldn't pull his weight in the war. She saw this as the perfect opportunity to make an example of him. He would be sent on a mission that would surely lead to his death, and in doing so, he would serve as a warning to the rest of humanity. Kelera ordered the mission, a suicide run into the heart of enemy territory, where the Cressari forces had been hunting down human survivors. Roland was chosen because he was seen as weak and unimportant. He had failed every mission he had been assigned to, and his comrades were tired of picking up the pieces after him. No one expected him to make it out alive. Roland, on the other hand, wasn't ready to give up. He had failed time and time again, but the thought of his planet and his people being wiped out was something he couldn't ignore. The mission was dangerous, but it was also a chance to prove to himself that he was not as weak as everyone thought. On the day of the mission, Roland stood before his commander, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel the weight of everyone's expectations resting on his shoulders, knowing that if he failed, it would only confirm what they already thought about him. He didn't know what to expect. He was just a soldier, a small piece in a war that was too big for him to understand. But in that moment, he made a choice. He would not let the Cressari destroy everything he held dear. He would survive no matter what. The mission started with Roland and his squad being dropped behind enemy lines, in a dense forest where Cressari forces were reported to be hunting down the last human survivors. The air was thick with tension as the soldiers moved silently through the trees, their footsteps muffled by the thick undergrowth. Roland could feel the weight of the mission bearing down on him. Every step felt like it might be his last. As they advanced deeper into the forest, Roland's heart raced. He had seen the brutality of the Cressari firsthand, how they would destroy everything in their path, leaving nothing but devastation behind. He had watched entire cities fall, helpless to stop the onslaught. And yet here he was, being sent into the heart of their forces, expected to achieve something no one believed he could. After hours of moving through the forest, the squad reached a clearing where they found the remnants of a destroyed human base. It had been overrun, with nothing left but the charred remains of equipment and the bodies of fallen soldiers. Roland's stomach turned at the sight. His squad moved cautiously, looking for any signs of life or danger, but they found nothing. It was as if the Cressari had wiped it all out, leaving nothing behind. That's when they were ambushed. Roland's squad was caught off guard. The Cressari forces attacked from all sides, their weapons unleashing devastating blasts of energy that lit up the night sky. The soldiers fought back with everything they had, but they were outnumbered and outmatched. Roland could hear the screams of his comrades as they fell one by one, and in that moment, he knew that he was going to die too. But something inside him refused to give up. His fear was replaced with a deep sense of resolve. He fought back with everything he had, using every trick he knew. But the Cressari were relentless, and Roland's squad was quickly overwhelmed. His fellow soldiers fell around him, leaving Roland alone in the battlefield, surrounded by enemies. It seemed like the end. Rollin was certain that he would die there just like so many others. But as he lay on the ground, bloodied and broken, something strange happened. He felt a pulse deep within him, a surge of energy he had never known before. It was as if his very being had been awakened. For a brief moment, everything went silent. The sounds of the battle faded away, replaced by a quiet hum that seemed to resonate deep within him. Rollin's eyes widened as he realized that the feeling wasn't just a figment of his imagination. It was real. The pulse grew stronger, and as it did, Rollin felt his body begin to change. His strength increased, his senses sharpened, and his mind cleared. He could see the Cressari soldiers around him as if they were moving in slow motion, their movements predictable and easy to read. His body moved with a speed and agility he had never felt before, as though he had tapped into something ancient, something powerful. Rollin stood up, his wounds healing rapidly. The Cressari, who had once seen him as nothing more than an insignificant human, now found themselves facing a completely different enemy. Rollin's newfound power surged through him, and with a single strike he took down one of the Cressari soldiers. The others backed away, unsure of what they were facing. Rollin's heart raced with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. He didn't know what was happening, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't the weakling everyone thought he was. He wasn't just a soldier anymore. He was something more. With the power surging through him, Rollin took the fight to the Cressari forces. One by one, they fell before him, unable to comprehend the change that had overcome him. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting for humanity's future, for the hope that they could stand against the might of the Cressari. Kilara, back on her command ship, watched the events unfold. She had anticipated Rollin's death, but now she saw something unexpected. A human, once weak and insignificant, now standing tall and fighting back with an unimaginable power. She frowned, her arrogance slowly turning to doubt. She had underestimated humanity, and Rollin Jet was the proof of that. But even as Rollin's power grew, he knew that this was only the beginning. The war wasn't over yet. The Cressari were still out there, and Kilara's plans were far from finished. But Rollin was no longer the weakling who would be crushed by their forces. He had become something far more dangerous, something humanity could build upon. And with that realization, Rollin's journey was just beginning. Rollin Jet stood on the battlefield, his heart still pounding from the adrenaline of his unexpected transformation. The Cressari soldiers who had once seen him as nothing more than a weak human were now lying defeated around him. He could feel the power surging through his body, an energy that seemed to awaken something deep within him. His wounds had healed almost instantly, and his senses were sharper than ever. The air felt different, alive with potential. As Rollin looked around at the fallen Cressari, a strange sense of calm washed over him. It was as if everything had shifted. He was no longer just a soldier fighting for survival. He had become something more, something stronger. For a brief moment, Rollin felt fear. What had happened to him? Where had this power come from? He didn't understand it, but he knew one thing for sure: he couldn't turn back. The Cressari might have underestimated him before, but now they would learn to fear him. Rollin looked down at his hands, which were still trembling slightly. The power was still there, just beneath the surface, waiting to be unleashed. But what should he do with it? He had been trained to fight for the survival of humanity, to do whatever was necessary to protect his people. But now, with this newfound strength, the stakes felt different. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting to change the course of the war. The Cressari were not far away. He could hear their voices, the faint sound of their orders being given. They were regrouping, no doubt trying to understand what had just happened. Rollin couldn't let them regain their confidence. He had to strike while they were still uncertain. Without thinking, he moved toward the closest group of Cressari soldiers. They were positioned near a wrecked human transport vehicle, their backs turned as they scanned the area for any remaining resistance. Rollin moved quietly, his footsteps almost inaudible, a side effect of the strange power coursing through him. He felt like he was part of the landscape, moving with the shadows, blending into the environment. When he was close enough, Rollin's instincts kicked in. He darted forward, faster than he had ever moved before. The first soldier barely had time to react before Rollin slammed his fist into the Cressari's chest, sending him flying backward. The other soldiers turned in shock, but it was too late. Rollin was already upon them. With a flurry of movements, Rollin took down the second and third soldiers. His strength was unlike anything he had ever felt. Every blow was precise and devastating, the power in his limbs unstoppable. The Cressari were strong, but they were not prepared for the fury of a human who had unlocked his true potential. As the last Cressari soldier fell to the ground, Roland took a moment to catch his breath. His heart was still racing, but the exhilaration he felt was different from anything he had experienced before. It wasn't just the thrill of victory. It was the feeling of control, of having the power to change the outcome of a battle. But there was no time to linger. Roland knew that the Cressari forces would soon regroup and try to retaliate. If he was going to have any hope of surviving, he needed to move quickly. He began to head toward the human resistance camp, his mind racing with thoughts of what had just happened. The forge. He had felt it. The power that had surged through him had come from the ancient human weapon hidden beneath the battlefield. Roland didn't know much about the forge, but he knew it was something special, something tied to humanity's past. And now, somehow, it had chosen him. As he walked, he couldn't help but think of the other soldiers who had died in the battle. They had been his comrades, and now they were gone. Roland had failed them once, but he wouldn't fail again. He had been given a second chance, and he would use it to protect the humans who remained. When Roland reached the resistance camp, he found it in chaos. The humans had been expecting an attack, but they had no idea that Roland would be returning, and certainly not in the way he had. The soldiers who saw him were stunned. They had heard the reports of Roland's death, and now they were faced with a man who was stronger, faster, and more capable than any of them could have imagined. The leader of the resistance, Commander Velok, approached him with caution. "Roland," Velok asked, his voice filled with disbelief. "How are you still alive?" Roland looked at him, his expression grim but determined. "The Cressari underestimated me," he said, "and now they'll pay for it." Velok didn't know what to make of this sudden change. He had known Roland for years, and the man standing before him was not the same soldier who had failed every mission. Roland had become something else entirely, something more dangerous, but Velok didn't question it. If Roland was the key to defeating the Cressari, then he would follow him. "We need to move quickly," Roland said, his voice steady. "The Cressari are regrouping. We don't have much time." Velok nodded, his mind racing. He had seen the power Roland now wielded, and he knew that the human soldier could lead them to victory. But he also knew that this power came with risks. What if Roland wasn't in control of it? What if the power consumed him? The Cressari would certainly come for him if they realized what had happened. But there was no time for doubt. The humans had to act now or they would lose everything. Under Roland's guidance, the resistance began to prepare for the next phase of the battle. They had always been outmatched by the Cressari, but now, with Roland leading them, things were different. He had become their symbol of hope, their champion. And for the first time in years, they began to believe that they might actually win. Roland spent the next few days training, honing his new abilities and learning to control the power that had been awakened within him. He wasn't sure how it worked, but he felt a deep connection to the forge, as if it was guiding him, teaching him to use its power more effectively. The more he trained, the more he realized that this wasn't just about physical strength. The forge was something more, something ancient and powerful that could change the course of the war. As the days passed, word of Roland's return spread throughout the resistance, and more soldiers began to rally to his cause. The Cressari were still out there, but for the first time in a long while, the humans were ready to fight back. They had a leader, a warrior, and a weapon that could rival the Cressari's might. But there was one problem. The Cressari knew Roland was still alive. Kelara, the Cressari general who had originally sent him on the suicide mission, was furious. She had underestimated him before, and now she was determined to eliminate him once and for all. She knew that if Roland and the humans were allowed to gain ground, the Cressari's hold on the galaxy would be threatened. And so, Kelara began to prepare for the final confrontation. Roland, however, was ready. He had learned from the past and would not make the same mistakes again. The humans had a chance now, but they had to take it. They could not afford to wait any longer. As Roland looked out over the battlefield once more, he felt the forge's power coursing through him. This time he would not fail. This time humanity would rise. Roland stood at the edge of the human camp, his eyes scanning the horizon. The past few days had been a blur of intense training, preparations, and planning, and he could feel the weight of the responsibility growing on his shoulders. The Cressari were still out there, But now, for the first time, he felt as though they had a real chance. The humans were ready to fight back, and he was their leader, their symbol of hope. But despite all the progress, Rollin couldn't shake the nagging doubt that lingered in his mind. The power he had gained from the forge was incredible, but he didn't fully understand it. It surged within him like a tidal wave, pushing him to his limits, and sometimes he wondered if it was starting to control him. There were moments when he could feel his thoughts slipping away, as if the forge's power was becoming more than just a tool. It was becoming a part of him, a force that he couldn't easily control. Rollin shook off the thought. Now was not the time for doubts. The Cressari had launched another wave of attacks on human settlements, and the resistance had no choice but to retaliate. The stakes were higher than ever. He could feel the tension in the air as he gathered his team, a group of battle-hardened soldiers who had seen the horrors of war and survived. They were ready to follow him, but Rollin knew that their success depended on more than just his newfound strength. It depended on their unity and their resolve. The humans had one thing the Cressari didn't, the will to fight for their home. They were the underdogs, and though they had been beaten down time and time again, they refused to give up. Rollin had seen it in their eyes, the determination to survive, to protect their families, their planet. That was something the Cressari could never understand. They might have the superior technology and weapons, but the humans had something far more powerful: heart. As Rollin and his team prepared to move out, the sounds of the battle from the previous night still echoed in his mind. The Cressari had struck hard, but they had also underestimated the humans' resilience. Rollin had taken down several Cressari soldiers during their last encounter, but he knew that they would be ready for him this time. Kilara, the Cressari general who had once thought of him as a failure, would not make the same mistake again. She would come for him with everything she had. It was time to take the fight to the Cressari. Rollin led his team through the dense forest, moving silently and quickly. His senses were heightened by the forge's power, and he could see every movement in the shadows, every rustle of the leaves. He was no longer just a soldier. He was a predator, and the Cressari were his prey. His heart pounded with excitement, but he pushed the feeling down. He couldn't let his emotions control him. The team needed him to lead, to remain focused. After several hours of navigating the forest, they reached the Cressari outpost. It was a heavily fortified position, surrounded by tall walls and guarded by several alien sentries. The humans had no chance of breaking through the walls, but Rollin had a different plan. He knew that the key to defeating the Cressari lay in their supply lines. If they could disrupt the Cressari's resources, they would be forced to retreat. Rollin motioned for his team to stop and crouched down behind a thick bush, peering through the underbrush at the outpost. The Cressari soldiers were busy with their patrols, unaware of the humans lurking nearby. Rollin studied the area, his mind racing as he formulated a plan. He knew that the Cressari relied heavily on their energy supply, and if they could sabotage the energy grid, they would cripple the outpost and force the Cressari to retreat. He looked over at his second-in-command, Sergeant Traya, who nodded in understanding. Traya had been with him from the beginning, and they shared a bond of trust that was unbreakable. The two of them had fought together countless times, and though she didn't possess the same power that Rollin had gained from the forge, her experience and leadership were invaluable. "Traya, you take the north side with Malik and Maya. We'll hit the south side," Rollin whispered, his voice steady but urgent. "We need to move quickly and quietly. If we're caught, we won't get another chance." Traya nodded, her expression serious. "Understood, Rollin. We'll move out as soon as you give the signal." Rollin turned his attention back to the outpost. It was a dangerous mission, but the humans had no choice. If they didn't take action now, the Cressari would continue to push them back, and the war would be lost. The resistance depended on their success. Rollin's heart beat faster as he prepared to make his move. He could feel the forge's power within him, urging him forward. It was almost as if the weapon was calling to him, guiding his every step. But even with all the power at his disposal, he knew that the Cressari were a formidable enemy. He couldn't afford to be reckless. With a deep breath, Rollin gave the signal. The team moved swiftly, splitting into two groups to cover both sides of the outpost. Rollin led his group through the trees, staying low to the ground and avoiding the patrols. He felt the familiar rush of adrenaline, but this time there was something different. His senses were sharper than ever, and every movement seemed effortless. It was as if the forge had given him not just power, but clarity, an understanding of how to use that power in the most efficient way. As they reached the outer walls of the outpost, Rollin signaled for his team to stop. He could see the energy grid in the distance, protected by a few Cressari soldiers. He studied the area looking for the best point of entry. The Cressari soldiers were spread thin, but they were vigilant. Rollin's heart pounded with anticipation as he realized that this was the moment that could change everything. If they succeeded here, the Cressari would be forced to retreat, and the humans would gain a critical advantage. With a swift motion, Rollin dashed forward, his team following closely behind. The Cressari soldiers didn't see them coming until it was too late. Rollin moved with precision, taking down the first guard with a single blow. The others were caught off guard, and within seconds, Rollin and his team had neutralized the Cressari forces. As they approached the energy grid, Rollin felt a sense of urgency. They had to disable it before the Cressari could call for reinforcements. He moved quickly, setting the charges while the rest of the team kept watch. Every second felt like an eternity, but Rollin remained focused. The forge's power flowed through him, helping him stay calm under pressure. Finally, the charges were set. Rollin signaled for his team to fall back. They had accomplished their mission, but there was no time to waste. The Cressari would soon realize what had happened, and they would retaliate with everything they had. As Rollin and his team retreated into the forest, the sound of the explosion echoed through the trees. The energy grid had been destroyed, and the Cressari outpost was crippled. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. Rollin knew that this was only the beginning. The Cressari would not give up easily, but the humans had shown that they were capable of fighting back. They had the power to change the course of the war, and Rollin would lead them to victory, no matter what it took. Rollin felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders as he stood before the team. Their success in the last mission had been a crucial step in the war, but it was only a small victory. The Cressari were still out there, regrouping, preparing for their next strike. The humans had dealt a blow to their supply lines, but now they needed to press the advantage. The days after their successful attack on the Cressari outpost had been filled with tension. Every day, the human resistance fortified their defenses, gathering more soldiers and supplies, preparing for the next battle. Rollin could feel the urgency in the air. The Cressari would not stay down for long. They were powerful, relentless, and now that they knew what Rollin was capable of, they would come for him. Rollin's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps approaching. Trya, the second in command of the human resistance, walked up to him, her face serious. She had been with him from the beginning, and like him, she had seen the horrors of war. But there was something different in her eyes now, hope. A hope that had been sparked by their recent victories, but Rollin knew that hope alone wouldn't win the war. "We've got a new report," Trya said, handing him a data pad. "The Cressari are planning a full-scale assault. They've gathered a massive fleet and they're moving toward Earth. This is it. We don't have much time." Rollin glanced at the data pad, his eyes scanning the information. The Cressari were preparing for an all-out invasion. Earth, the heart of human civilization, was the next target. If the humans didn't stop the Cressari now, there would be nothing left to defend. Rollin's mind raced. He had spent so many years as an underdog, always on the back foot, always fighting for survival. But now, with the power he had gained from the forge, he was no longer the weak human the Cressari thought he was. He was something more, something they couldn't predict. But even with his newfound strength, he knew that the battle ahead would be the hardest yet. "We can't let them reach Earth," Rollin said, his voice calm but filled with determination. "We need to take the fight to them before they land." Trya nodded. "The fleet is too large for us to handle directly, but we can't just sit back and wait. We need a plan." Rollin turned to the team gathered around him. The faces of the soldiers were filled with uncertainty, but also a quiet resolve. They had seen the devastation the Cressari could bring, but they had also seen what was possible when they fought together. Rollin knew that the humans were more than capable of taking on the Cressari, but it would take everything they had. "We'll take out their communications," Rollin said, his eyes narrowing with focus. "If we can disrupt their command, we can delay their assault and give us time to gather reinforcements. Once we've done that, we'll hit their supply ships. Without their resources, they'll be forced to retreat." It was a risky plan, but it was the only option. The Cressari were too powerful to defeat in a direct confrontation, but if they could weaken their ability to coordinate and supply their forces, the humans might have a chance. Roland's team quickly began preparing for the mission. The Cressari fleet was moving fast, and there was no time to waste. They had to move quickly, silently, and strike hard. The team boarded their transport ships, and as the engines roared to life, Roland could feel the weight of the mission pressing down on him. They were headed toward the heart of Cressari space, a place where they would face overwhelming odds. But this time, they were not going in as weaklings. They were going in as fighters, as survivors, as humans who refused to back down. The journey to the Cressari fleet took hours, and Roland used the time to focus. The power from the forge was still with him, but he had learned to control it better. The clarity he felt when he tapped into that power was becoming more natural, but it still scared him. It was too much to understand all at once. He didn't know what would happen if he lost control. But that fear was nothing compared to the fear of losing Earth. The Cressari had already taken so much from humanity, and he couldn't let them take it all. As they neared the Cressari fleet, the team dropped into position. The stars above were a cold, distant light, and the silence of space felt heavier than ever. The humans' small transport ships were dwarfed by the massive Cressari vessels, which gleamed with an alien power that seemed almost unnatural. The humans were nothing more than ants in comparison, but Roland knew that they could still make a difference. Roland gave the signal, and the team moved into action. They approached the Cressari's communications hub, a massive station that orbited a nearby moon. It was heavily guarded, but Roland knew that they had the element of surprise on their side. The Cressari were not expecting humans to strike back so quickly, and they certainly weren't expecting the kind of power Roland had gained. They infiltrated the station with ease, slipping past the Cressari patrols and making their way to the central communication room. Roland felt the power from the forge flowing through him, sharpening his senses and making each movement feel effortless. He could feel the hum of the station, the vibrations in the walls, the faint buzz of the Cressari machinery. It was all so alien, so cold, but Roland didn't let it distract him. He had a job to do. Once they reached the communication hub, Roland worked quickly. He connected his devices to the Cressari systems, bypassing their security protocols with ease. His mind was sharp, calculating every move before it was made. The Cressari would have no idea what hit them. As the communication systems began to fail, Roland's team set the charges to destroy the central hub. They had done it. The Cressari could no longer coordinate their forces. It was a major blow to their invasion plans, and it would give the humans the time they needed to prepare for the next phase of the war. But as they made their way back to their ships, a warning flashed on Roland's screen. The Cressari were mobilizing faster than expected. They had already begun their retaliation. The moment the humans disabled their communications, the Cressari knew they had been attacked. "We've got company," Tria said, her voice tense. Roland looked up and saw the Cressari ships closing in fast. They had underestimated how quickly the enemy could regroup. There was no turning back now. The Cressari would not let this strike go unanswered, and Roland knew that their window of opportunity was closing fast. "Get to the ships," Roland shouted. "We need to move now." The team ran for their transport ships, but the Cressari were already upon them. The sound of enemy weapons filled the air as Roland's team fought to defend their escape. The humans had dealt a blow to the Cressari, but now they had to survive long enough to regroup and return to Earth. As the transport ships lifted off, Roland looked back at the Cressari fleet. The battle was far from over. The humans had won a small victory, but the war was still raging. And this time, Roland was ready to lead the charge. With Earth's future on the line, Roland knew that the fight was just beginning, but this time they were not the underdogs. They were fighters, and they would take the fight to the Cressari with everything they had. Roland stood at the bridge of the human command ship, looking out at the stars. The battle had reached its final stage. The Cressari fleet was massive, far larger than anything humanity had ever faced, and they were coming straight for Earth. The stakes had never been higher. If they lost this fight, humanity's future would be erased from the galaxy. The Resistance had taken a bold stand, but the final confrontation was now upon them. Roland could feel the weight of responsibility heavier than ever. The power he had gained from the forge had made him a formidable force, but it was more than just physical strength now. It was a symbol, a symbol of what humanity could achieve when they fought with everything they had. But symbols alone wouldn't win this war. They needed a strategy. They needed to work together. They needed to take down the Cressari once and for all. Roland had spent countless hours planning the assault, studying every weak point in the Cressari fleet. He knew their tactics, their strategies, and he had learned from every encounter they had. The Cressari thought they could crush humanity like they had crushed so many others before, but they had underestimated one thing: human determination. The room was filled with the hum of the ship's engines as the final preparations were made. The resistance fighters, those who had survived the brutal battles, were gathered around the command table discussing their next moves. There was a quiet resolve in the air. Everyone knew that this was their last chance. "Roland," Tria's voice broke through his thoughts. "We're ready to go. The Cressari fleet is closing in. We need to make our move now." Roland nodded, pushing his doubts aside. There was no room for hesitation. "Let's do it. We hit them fast and hard. This is our moment." The resistance fighters had been trained for this day, for the moment when they would face the enemy head-on. But nothing could have prepared them for the scale of the battle that awaited them. The Cressari ships were already forming a blockade around Earth, and their guns were primed, ready to unleash destruction. Humanity had no choice but to strike first, to catch the Cressari off guard before they could fire. Roland, Tria, and the rest of the team boarded their ships, their mission clear. They would lead the charge, disrupting the Cressari formation and making a path for the rest of the fleet to follow. Roland's ship was the first to break through the Cressari defenses, a symbol of the Resistance's strength. The battle raged around them as they engaged in a brutal, high-speed dogfight in the cold vacuum of space. The Cressari responded quickly, their advanced weapons tearing through the blackness, sending explosive waves toward the humans. But Roland was no longer the weakling they had once thought. He moved with the precision of a master, his ship dodging and weaving, outmaneuvering the Cressari at every turn. His senses were heightened, his mind sharp, as though the forge itself was guiding him. As the battle intensified, Roland's team struck the Cressari's command ship, their primary target. It was a massive vessel, bristling with weaponry, but it had one vulnerability: a weak point in its energy core. If they could hit it, they would cripple the Cressari fleet and force them into retreat. Roland knew that this was the moment that could turn the tide. If they failed, Earth would be lost. The Cressari would wipe them out, just as they had done with countless other civilizations before. But if they succeeded, they could deal a blow so devastating that the Cressari would be forced to rethink their entire strategy. Roland's hand gripped the control stick as he led his team toward the Cressari command ship. The ship loomed larger in his view, a dark, imposing structure that seemed to reflect the coldness of its creators. He could feel the weight of every decision he had made leading up to this moment. He had trained for years, fought alongside his comrades, and survived when others had given up. But now, everything came down to this one final strike. "We're in position," Tria said over the comm. "Prepare to launch the charge." Roland nodded, his focus unbroken. "Now, Tria." In that instant, the resistance fighters fired their weapons, sending a torrent of energy toward the Cressari ship's vulnerable core. The explosion was blinding, a flash of light that illuminated the battlefield. The Cressari ship shuddered and groaned as its energy systems began to fail. The humans had done it. The Cressari command ship was down, but the battle was far from over. The Cressari were not about to give up so easily. They rallied, their remaining ships focusing their fire on the humans. But Roland's team had already broken their formation, scattering in different directions to confuse the Cressari and buy time for the rest of the fleet to join the fight. Roland's heart raced as the Cressari retaliated. Their weapons blasted past his ship, narrowly missing him as he maneuvered at incredible speeds. His body tensed with every near miss, but his mind remained calm, focused. He could feel the power of the forge within him, but he didn't let it control him. He used it, guided by his own instincts and experience. The battle raged on for hours, the silence of space broken by the roar of engines and the crackle of weapons fire. But slowly, the humans began to gain the upper hand. The Cressari fleet was faltering, their formation breaking as they struggled to recover from the loss of their command ship. The humans had hit them where it hurt the most. As Roland continued to fight, he could see the Cressari ships retreating. They were abandoning the fight, their ships turning away from Earth and heading back into the vastness of space. The humans had won, but Roland knew that this was just the beginning. The Cressari might have been forced to retreat for now, but they would come back. They would never stop until humanity was erased. The war was far from over, but for the first time, Roland felt a sense of hope. Humanity had shown that they could fight back, that they could stand against the might of the Cressari and win. As the last of the Cressari ships disappeared into the stars, Roland allowed himself a moment of relief. The battle was over, but the fight was far from finished. He knew that he would have to continue leading the humans, guiding them through the challenges that lay ahead. But for now, they had won. Roland looked out at the stars once more, his heart swelling with pride. Humanity had done the impossible. They had fought back against an enemy that had believed them to be weak, and they had won. It was a small victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. The Cressari might have been powerful, but they had underestimated the humans. They had underestimated Roland Jet, and that was a mistake they would never forget. With Earth safe, for now, Roland and his team returned to their home planet, ready to rebuild and prepare for whatever the future might hold. The Cressari would not have an easy victory, not as long as humanity had the strength to fight. And Roland would continue to lead them as long as it took, to ensure that humanity's light never faded.